7 seals, 7 temples, 7 heroes who aren't Link. Without them, Ganondorf cannot be stopped. Without them, the Master Sword loses its power. Without them, entire timelines collapse into darkness. The Sages of Hyrule stand as the invisible pillars holding reality together, yet most players rush past their significance, focused on the hero's journey. But what if those pillars crumbled? What if the ancient bloodlines failed to awaken? What if the chosen protectors simply never existed? The answer isn't just dark, it's the complete unraveling of everything the Legend of Zelda stands for. To understand what Hyrule loses without its sages, we need to understand what the sages actually are. Throughout the Zelda series, sages serve as a bridge between the Sacred Realm and Hyrule itself. According to Ocarina of Time, the ancient sages built the Temple of Time specifically to protect the entrance to the Sacred Realm and the Triforce hidden within the Temple of Light. They weren't just guardians, they were architects of divine protection, creating physical and magical barriers between mortals and godly power. But the sages' role evolved beyond simple protection. In Ocarina of Time, Rauru explains that when evil rules, an awakening voice from the Sacred Realm calls those destined to be sages who dwell in 5 temples, one in a deep forest, one on a high mountain, one under a vast lake, one within the House of the Dead, and one inside a goddess of the sand. These aren't random locations. Each temple corresponds to an element, and each sage represents one of the 6 major races of Hyrule: Hylian, Kokiri, Goron, Zora, Sheikah, and Gerudo. The 7th sage, Princess Zelda herself, leads them all. This structure is critical because it means the sages aren't just powerful individuals, they're representatives of an entire kingdom's diversity and unity. When the sages combine their powers, they're not just channeling their own strength, they're channeling the collective will and spirit of all Hyrule's peoples. Without them, that unity doesn't exist, and without that unity, Ganondorf's conquest becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Let's start with the most iconic scenario, Ocarina of Time without its 7 sages. In the actual game, Link pulls the Master Sword from the pedestal of time at age 10, but because he's too young to be the hero of time, Rauru seals him in the Chamber of Sages for 7 years. During those 7 years, Ganondorf obtains the Triforce, which immediately splits due to his unbalanced heart. He keeps the Triforce of Power, while the Triforces of Wisdom and Courage go to Zelda and Link. Now, imagine those 7 years without the sages. Link is still sealed away because he's too young for the Master Sword, but there's no Rauru to protect him, no Chamber of Sages to preserve him. The Master Sword simply rejects him, and without the Sage of Light's intervention, Link either dies or remains in some limbo state, unable to age, unable to wake, trapped forever in childhood while the world burns around him. Meanwhile, Ganondorf seizes the Triforce. In the actual timeline, his evil heart causes it to split, limiting his power, but the Triforce splits because of the balance established by the goddesses, a balance the sages help maintain. Without the sages, that balance doesn't exist. It's entirely possible that Ganondorf's unbalanced heart still splits the Triforce, but there's no divine mechanism to redirect the pieces to their proper bearers. The Triforce of Wisdom and Courage might simply vanish into the Sacred Realm, lost forever, or worse, they might remain with Ganondorf, inactive but preventing anyone else from ever claiming them. With the Triforce of Power and no opposition, Ganondorf transforms Hyrule in a matter of years. According to the game, his evil power radiated from the temples of Hyrule, corrupting them with monsters. But the temples only became corrupted because the sages weren't awakened to cleanse them. Without sages to even potentially cleanse the temples, the corruption spreads unchecked from day one. The Forest Temple, Fire Temple, Water Temple, Shadow Temple, and Spirit Temple don't just become infested with monsters, they become permanent sources of dark energy, actively pumping corruption into the surrounding regions. The Great Deku Tree dies with no successor. The Kokiri Forest becomes twisted and dangerous. Darunia and the Gorons face an eternal volcanic crisis with no hero to save them, and they either perish or become enslaved by Ganondorf's forces. King Zora remains frozen forever because there's no sage of water to cleanse the water temple, and Princess Ruto either dies in Lord Jabu Jabu's belly or becomes trapped in the corrupted temple. The Sheikah, represented by Impa, have no leader, and the resistance efforts they might organize crumble. The Gerudo, represented by Naboru, remain under Ganondorf's iron fist, with no possibility of internal rebellion. Most critically, without the Seven Sages, there's no seal. The entire climax of Ocarina of Time depends on the sages combining their powers after Link defeats Ganon. They create a seal that traps Ganondorf in the evil realm, preventing him from escaping and conquering Hyrule again. Without them, even if by some miracle Link could grow up, obtain the Master Sword, and somehow defeat Ganondorf in combat, the King of Evil simply returns, over and over, endlessly. There's no permanent victory, only temporary setbacks. But the absence of sages creates an even more fundamental problem. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Zelda uses her power as a sage to send Link back to his childhood, splitting the timeline. This action, which Zelda performs specifically in her role as the seventh sage, creates the adult timeline where Ganondorf remains sealed, and the child timeline where young Link warns Zelda about Ganondorf's treachery. Without Zelda's sage powers, this time manipulation doesn't happen. Link can't return to his childhood to prevent Ganondorf's initial rise. The timeline doesn't split. There's just one continuous nightmare where Ganondorf rules forever. This has massive implications for every game in the Zelda timeline. Wind Waker takes place in the adult timeline, centuries after Ocarina of Time, in a world where the hero of time never returned when Ganondorf broke free from his seal. The gods flooded Hyrule to stop him, creating the Great Sea. But that flood only happened because Ganondorf had been sealed in the first place, sealed by the sages. Without the sages, there's no seal to break, no prophecy of the hero's return, and no reason to the gods to flood anything. Ganondorf simply conquers and rules, transforming Hyrule into a twisted kingdom of darkness where the sun barely shines and hope is a forgotten concept. In Twilight Princess, which takes place in the child timeline, the sages play an even more direct role in the plot. After young Link returns to his childhood and warns Zelda about Ganondorf, the royal family captures the Gerudo King and sentences him to execution. The ancient sages, 6 ghostly figures who have guarded the Mirror of Twilight since ancient times, attempt to execute Ganondorf at the Arbiter's grounds. They chain him to a massive stone, and the Sage of Water stabs him through the chest with the sword of the 6 sages. But Ganondorf survives. By what the sages themselves call a divine prank, the Triforce of power manifests on his hand, preventing his death. In his rage, Ganondorf breaks free and kills the Sage of Water before the remaining sages, panicking, use the Mirror of Twilight to banish him to the Twilight Realm. This failed execution is a cornerstone event in Twilight Princess's backstory, explaining how Ganondorf ends up in the Twilight Realm, how he empowers Zant, and why the Mirror of Twilight becomes so important to the plot. Without the sages, none of this happens. Ganondorf's capture by the royal family means nothing if there's no one to execute him. He's either imprisoned indefinitely, which we know from other games doesn't work because his followers will eventually free him, or he's killed by conventional means that his Triforce of power allows him to survive anyway. But let's say he does get imprisoned. Without the Mirror of Twilight, which the sages guard and operate, there's no way to banish him to another realm. He simply remains in Hyrule, a constant threat. The Mirror of Twilight itself exists because the ancient goddesses used it to banish the Dark Interlopers to the Twilight Realm long before the events of any Zelda game. But according to the sages in Twilight Princess, they've been guarding the mirror since ancient times at the command of the goddesses. Without the sages, the mirror has no guardians. The Dark Interlopers who were banished to become the Twily might never have been properly sealed away. Zant never gains power from Ganondorf because Ganondorf never gets banished to the Twilight Realm. The entire conflict of Twilight Princess simply doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean things are better. Without the Mirror of Twilight being used to banish threats, Hyrule faces every danger directly. The Dark Interlopers might still be in the Light World, wielding their fused shadows and attempting to conquer the Sacred Realm. The balance between light and shadow, carefully maintained by the goddesses and the sages, collapses into chaos. A Link to the Past, which takes place in the Fallen Hero timeline, the timeline where Link dies fighting Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, provides another critical example of the sages' importance. The game's backstory mentions the 7 wise men who sealed Ganon in the Sacred Realm during the Imprisoning War. According to both the game's text and Hyrule Historia, these 7 wise men are the same as the 7 sages from Ocarina of Time, or at least their successors in a spiritual lineage. In A Link to the Past, the 7 maidens Link must rescue are descendants of these ancient sages. Princess Zelda is one of these maidens. The villain Ganon captures these maidens specifically because their bloodline connection to the ancient sages gives them power. He needs to sacrifice them to break the seal on the Dark World, the corrupted sacred realm, and allow Ganon to return to the Light World. Without the original 7 sages, there are no descendants. There are no maidens with the power to maintain or break seals. Ganon has no targets for his sacrifices, but more importantly, there was never a seal on the Dark World in the first place. The imprisoning war, which the sages won by sealing Ganon away, either never happens or happens without a seal. Ganon conquers the Light World immediately after obtaining the Triforce in the fallen hero timeline. There's no containment, no sacred realm to trap him in, no barrier between his evil and the innocent people of Hyrule. The game's protagonist, Link, would have no quest to rescue the maidens because they don't exist. The Master Sword, which Link needs to defeat Ganon, might not even be accessible. In A Link to the Past, Sahasrara, a descendant of the sages, guides Link and provides him with crucial items like the Pegasus shoes. Without the sage's bloodline, these guides don't exist. Link faces Ganon's already victorious kingdom with no guidance, no special items, and no hope of breaking a seal that was never cast in the first place. The Wind Waker expands the concept of sages even further. In addition to the original 7 sages, the game introduces 2 more, the Earth Sage and the Wind Sage. These sages have a specific purpose. They maintain the Master Sword's power through their prayers. According to the game, the Earth Sage Laruto and the Wind Sage Fado were killed by Ganondorf specifically to weaken the Master Sword. When Link finds the blade in the submerged Hyrule Castle, it has lost its power to repel evil. Link must awaken new sages, Medli as the Earth Sage and Makar as the Wind Sage, to restore the sword's power through their prayers. Only then can Link actually harm Ganondorf. Without these sages, the Master Sword is just a particularly well-made weapon. It can't repel evil, can't seal darkness, and can't deliver the finishing blow that defeats Ganondorf. Even if Link manages to fight Ganondorf to a stalemate, he has no way to actually end the threat. In Wind Waker's backstory, when Ganondorf broke free from his seal and the hero of time didn't reappear, the people prayed to the gods, who responded by flooding Hyrule. But the very fact that Ganondorf could break free implies his seal was weakening. Seals weaken when the sages who cast them die and no successors take their place. Without sages from the beginning, there's no seal to weaken. Ganondorf never gets sealed after Ocarina of Time, so he never breaks free centuries later because he never left in the first place. The gods' decision to flood Hyrule was an act of desperation when all other options failed, but without the sages, all other options fail immediately. The gods might flood Hyrule much sooner, or they might not flood it at all, instead allowing Ganondorf to have his kingdom, while the gods simply abandoned the land entirely. The Great Sea might never exist. The Wind Waker's entire world, with its islands and sailing and discovery, vanishes from possibility, replaced by a dark, twisted version of Hyrule, where Ganondorf's castle sits atop a kingdom of suffering. A Link Between Worlds demonstrates yet another iteration of the sages concept. In this game, there are 7 sages, but uniquely, Princess Zelda is not one of them. Instead, the sages are regular people from across Hyrule: Osfala, Gully, Rosso, Auron, Impa, Irene, and Ceres. The villain Yuga captures these 7 specifically because he needs their power to revive Ganon. He transforms them into paintings and uses their essence to break Ganon's seal. Without these 7 sages, Yuga's plan changes entirely. He might not be able to revive Ganon at all, which sounds like a good thing until we realize that Ganon's seal in A Link Between Worlds is itself weakening over time. Without the sages' power maintaining it, even passively through their bloodlines, the seal simply breaks on its own. Ganon returns anyway, but without the sages to help Link, there's no guidance, no Master Sword awakening, and no Triforce of Courage to grant the hero, just a Demon King emerging into a defenseless world. Tears of the Kingdom expands the concept of sages even further. In this game, King Rauru, the Sage of Light, leads a group of sages that includes representatives from the Rito, Gorons, Zora, and Gerudo. These ancient sages fought against the demon king Ganondorf in Hyrule's founding era. Rauru gifted them secret stones, mystical gems that amplify their innate powers. When Ganondorf proves too powerful, Rauru sacrifices himself to seal the Demon King beneath Hyrule Castle, a seal that lasts for thousands of years. In the present day of Tears of the Kingdom, Link must awaken the descendants of these ancient sages. These new sages, Tulin, Yunobo, Sidon, and Riju, swear allegiance to Link and join him in the fight against Ganondorf's forces. Their powers directly support Link in battle, and their storylines tie in to the larger narrative of each region healing and preparing for the final confrontation.
Without Rauru and the original sages, Ganondorf conquers Hyrule during the kingdom's founding. There's no seal beneath the castle, no thousands of years of peace and prosperity. Ganondorf rules from the moment Hyrule is established, transforming it into his domain. The Hyrule that players explore in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the one with its shrines and towers and diverse peoples, never exists. It's replaced by a nightmare kingdom that has known nothing but Ganondorf's tyranny since its inception. The pattern across all these games is clear. The sages aren't just helpful allies or useful characters in Link's journey, they're structural necessities. They're the magical and spiritual infrastructure that allows heroism to succeed. Without them, Link might still be brave, skilled, and determined, but bravery without power is just martyrdom. Link becomes a lone warrior fighting an unwinnable war. But let's explore the deeper implications. If the sages never existed, we need to consider why they never existed. The sages are chosen by destiny, called by the sacred realm, connected by bloodlines that trace back to ancient times. If they never existed, it suggests something went wrong at a fundamental level. Either the bloodlines were severed, the sacred realm stopped calling them, or the divine plan itself failed. If the bloodlines were severed, it means sometime in ancient Hyrule's history, the people who would have become sages were killed, scattered, or prevented from having descendants. The imprisoning war mentioned in A Link to the Past's backstory would have gone very differently. Knights and sorcerers fought to contain Ganon's evil, but without sages to create the seal, they could only fight and die. Generations of heroes would throw themselves against Ganon's forces, achieving nothing permanent. Hyrule becomes a kingdom perpetually at war, its resources constantly drained, its people living in fear. If the sacred realm stopped calling the sages, it suggests the realm itself became too corrupted. Once Ganondorf enters the sacred realm and claims the Triforce, his evil transforms it into the Dark World. But the transformation is normally gradual, allowing time for heroes and sages to respond. Without sages, there's no response. The corruption spreads faster and more completely until the sacred realm becomes entirely evil, incapable of reaching out to the light world, unable to call champions to defend it. The barrier between realms weakens, and darkness seeps through, poisoning Hyrule from within. If the divine plan itself failed, we're looking at something even more catastrophic. The goddesses Din, Nehru, and Furor created Hyrule and left the Triforce as their gift to the people, but they also established systems, the sages, the hero spirit, the blood of the goddess, to protect their creation when evil inevitably arose. If the sages never existed, it might mean the goddesses didn't create them, couldn't create them, or created them and watched them fail immediately. This suggests a universe where the goddesses made a mistake, where their divine foresight proved insufficient, or where the forces of darkness were always going to win regardless of what safeguards were put in place. It's a much bleaker cosmology than the one Zelda games typically present. Instead of the cyclical nature of good versus evil, where heroes rise to meet each threat, we get a linear descent into darkness where evil triumphs and stays triumphant. Some fans might argue that without sages, new heroes would emerge, different champions, alternative solutions, unexpected saviors. But the Zelda series makes it clear that the sages aren't random individuals who happen to be powerful. They're specifically chosen by fate, connected to ancient bloodlines, and called by the sacred realm itself. Rauru explicitly states in Ocarina of Time that he is one of the ancient sages who built the Temple of Time ages ago. This isn't a recent development or a response to a crisis. The sages have existed since Hyrule's founding, suggesting they're part of the world's fundamental design. Without that design element, Hyrule has no immune system. When evil arrives, the kingdom can only react with conventional means: soldiers, weapons, fortifications. These might delay a threat like Ganondorf, but they can't seal him, can't cleanse corrupted temples, can't maintain the Master Sword's power, and can't manipulate time to create alternate timelines. The tools that allow good to eventually triumph simply don't exist. Link himself becomes a tragic figure in this scenario. He might still be the hero of time, still draw the Master Sword, still possess the Triforce of courage, but courage without support is suicide. In Ocarina of Time, Link depends on each sage he awakens. They break the barriers protecting Ganon's castle, they create the bridge to reach it, they seal Ganondorf after Link defeats him. Remove the sages and Link can't even reach the final battle, let alone win it in any meaningful way. Princess Zelda, who in most games serves as the seventh sage or as a sage herself, loses a crucial aspect of her power. She's still the bearer of the Triforce of Wisdom and still possesses latent magical ability.
But her sage powers specifically allow her to do things normal magic cannot, like sending Link back in time or combining her power with 6 other sages to create seals strong enough to contain Ganondorf for centuries. Without her sage identity, Zelda becomes a wise princess with some magical ability, but she's no longer a linchpin of divine power. The timeline split that defines the entire Zelda chronology doesn't happen without Zelda's sage powers. The series exists in 3 main timelines: the adult timeline, where Ganondorf was sealed, the child timeline, where young Link prevented Ganondorf's initial rise, and the fallen hero timeline, where Link died fighting Ganondorf. All 3 stem from Ocarina of Time, and the split between adult and child timelines specifically happens because Zelda, as a sage, sends Link back in time. Without that time manipulation, there's only one timeline. Link either defeats Ganondorf or he doesn't. If he defeats Ganondorf but can't seal him, Ganondorf returns. If Link dies trying, Ganondorf wins immediately. Either way, the richness and complexity of the Zelda timeline, with its parallel worlds and diverging histories, collapses into a single linear progression of Ganondorf's conquest. The Master Sword itself becomes questionable without sages. Multiple games establish that sages are connected to the sword's creation, maintenance, and power. In Wind Waker, sages specifically maintain the sword's power through prayer. In Skyward Sword, while no sages appear, the sword's creation involves blessings from the goddess Hylia and trials that test the hero. But later games establish that sages maintain and sometimes reforge the Master Sword across generations. Without them, the sword might still exist as an ancient artifact, but its power to repel evil, its defining characteristic, weakens or disappears entirely. We're left with a Hyrule that resembles other fantasy kingdoms invaded by Dark Lords, but without the unique magical infrastructure that makes Zelda's world special. Ganondorf becomes Sauron, a Dark Lord who conquers and rules without significant opposition. Link becomes a tragic hero who fights bravely but loses because bravery isn't enough against godlike power. Zelda becomes a captured princess with no ability to affect her kingdom's fate, and the cycle of rebirth, the hero's spirit, the blood of the goddess, and the recurring evil continues mechanically without any mechanism for good to ever win. The absence of sages represents more than the loss of 7 powerful individuals. It represents the collapse of hope itself. In every Zelda game, no matter how dark things get, no matter how powerful Ganondorf becomes, there's always a path to victory. That path inevitably runs through the sages. They guide, support, empower, and ultimately seal the evil that threatens the world. They're the proof that good has built-in advantages, that the goddesses didn't abandon their creation, that darkness can be contained. Without them, darkness can't be contained. Ganondorf's first victory becomes his only victory, permanent and unchallenged. The legend of Zelda transforms from an epic cycle of heroism into a cautionary tale about a world that lost its protectors. And in that world, the Master Sword rusts in a forgotten temple, the Triforce remains forever split and lost, and the name Zelda is remembered only as the last queen of a fallen kingdom, rather than as the leader of sages who helped save the world again and again across countless timelines and generations. This is why the sages matter, not because they're memorable characters, though many are, not because their temples are fun dungeons, though most are, but because without them, the fundamental premise of the Zelda series breaks down. The idea that good ultimately triumphs, that heroes rise to meet darkness, that courage, wisdom, and power can overcome evil, all of it depends on the sages being there to make triumph possible. They're the invisible foundation of every victory, the unsung heroes whose absence would mean not just defeat, but the end of hope itself.